There's so much to learn at TED, isn't there? So much to reflect upon about what we learned today. And I find it quite ironic then that I've been asked to close this off because I'm going to focus on something that we need not learn, or actually, I guess I could phrase it to say, what can we gain from stepping back from learning? But I'll get to that at the end of my talk. Loki in the Nursery, The Unlikely Path to Tranquility. Usually when I teach classes here at UC Davis, I start immediately with questions. You'll notice that at these Loki talks, the interaction comes from laughter and applause and silence, but not from interaction with Q&A. That often happens in the end, if at all. So I'm not going to either explain or ask you yet to explain my title, but instead I'll be telling you two stories. The first story is that of my father. He was born in Winchester, Indiana in 1932. And growing up in Indiana, he was exposed to two different worlds. One was the world of the circus, of vaudeville performers, of radio humor, and the other was the world of the people in Indiana who didn't understand or celebrate or appreciate everything that I've just mentioned. People who he, decades later, would describe to me as willfully parochial, as willfully ignorant of a world beyond Winchester, Indiana. And my father, although he was a reader, he knew that he would not be a writer and that that would not be his ticket out of Winchester. And although he was a good student, he knew that he would not be a scientist. He loved instead the performing arts, and he decided at a very young age to become a magician. And a magician he was, first with multiplying rabbits, and then disappearing balls. And then soon he would learn more and more tricks, and he would move from beyond the city hall in Winchester to performing at a great number of cities in that area. And then with his father as his silent road manager, they would even leave Indiana. They would go to Ohio. They would go to small towns in Illinois. And he was the amazing Davy Jones, and he would give these talks. And he found that lust for travel. We know it from the stories of George Bailey and It's a Wonderful Life. And he became an actor. He became a theater director. And he met my mother in New York City. They soon moved to Washington, D.C., where I was born and raised. And then I, too, got that urban bug. As a high school student, I interned for a month in New York City. I went to Boston University as an undergrad, knowing that I wanted to explore another great city. I met my wife in London, England, came back and followed her eventually to Chicago, spent some time in Berkeley, spent some time in Sacramento, and I realized that this lust for culture, this lust for performance, this lust for literary conversations, such as one could find in great cities, that this really drove me. And ironically, although I've lived in Davis for a dozen years now, I realized that one of my main goals as a young adult was to stay away from a town about the size of Davis, California. And I think some of the students who come to UC Davis feel the same way, that there's an inherent interest, isn't there, in Los Angeles and in Berkeley, that they have long traditions of entertainments of various sorts. And outside of the deep strengths of the universities there, some people still think of Davis as a consolation when they could go to Berkeley or Los Angeles, thinking first of those particular cities. And I found that too, that as a young faculty member here, that there were some things about the city of Davis and about UC Davis that didn't sit right with me. And I realized that students here, they have to create their own culture instead of depending upon a big city to provide that culture. I've worked for many years at KDVS as a volunteer at our campus and community radio station. And KDVS DJs know that very well. The Aggie is a student-run newspaper. And if you look at a great number of examples of where we find culture, not only here on campus, but in the city of Davis, a lot of that is presented by, organized by, sometimes performed by undergraduates here. And it's wonderful what our university teaches us about independent thought and about creating our own cultural pathways. So I decided to do that as a faculty member. I realized that unlike my father growing up in the 30s and 40s, that we did not have access here on the radio to the sort of entertainment that I was interested in. So in the year 2000, I created Dr. Andy's Poetry and Technology Hour on KDBS, which is a radio show that I've hosted every Wednesday afternoon since then. And I've enjoyed conversations with Margaret Atwood and Sherman Alexie and Gary Snyder and shared them with listeners of this little radio station. And I should add that tomorrow is the last day of our fundraiser if you'd like to support that radio station. And I so enjoyed that. I realized as a professional when I was working for our Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning that our faculty were not sharing often enough ideas that they had about what great teaching was. So I created something called the Faculty Mentoring Faculty Program, where faculty would get together every Friday afternoon and talk about what were they doing in the classroom that really worked. And we shared those lessons, and we walked away inspired. It was kind of a very small snippet of what you get with today's event. I realized that we didn't have enough performances of the sort of poets that I would interview on my radio show. So I created the Poetry Night reading series. And so on the first Wednesday of every month at Bistro 33, and at the third Thursday of every month at the John Itzoulis Gallery, you can hear live poets, many of them traveling from great distances, knowing that we offer a free meal and sometimes, if it can be worked out, a stay at a hotel room. But the students really enjoy that, not least of which because in the spirit of what I spoke of before, there's an open mic after every featured poet, and students and other community members get to step forward and perform what they have, comedy and music as well as poetry. And in addition to that, I have helped to found our Cultural Action Committee of the City of Davis, and that's something that I chair. Too many of our student-run and philanthropic arts organizations don't have the ability to reach out with websites and social media in the ways that they should. So I founded a company called Eager Mondays, and we do professional development, and we do web design, and a lot of the money that we make, which is kind of funny because, like many of you, I recently turned in my taxes and I enjoyed a significant loss, as is the case with many startup organizations. But with the money that we made, we created websites for the Davis Shakespeare Ensemble and for Nameless Magazine, which is the undergraduate journal of creative writing here at UC Davis, and of the Davis Book Project, which is run by our Davis Poet Laureate, Allegra Silberstein. And so I took on these projects, and this is in addition to a full, sometimes crushing teaching load. And some people say to me, how possibly can you do all of these things? And I think of my late father and the inspiration that I got from him, and certainly that's an important part of it. But I smile because none of the things that I've mentioned have been the most difficult challenges that I've taken on in the last 10 years. And this brings me to my second story. I'd like to introduce you to my family. This is my wife, my daughter Geneva, who on Thursday, I should add, this is about a 5-year-old picture, earned her second-degree black belt in Taekwondo. This is my son Truman, who is now 5, and my son Juki, who's closest to us. And Juki will be the main topic of the rest of the story that I tell you, the story of my family. Juki, though he's chewing on a toy rather strangely here, may look like a typical child. Here he is staring at me in the camera. And you see kind of the pensive state. But this is not the Juki that we knew at this particular time. This was actually the Juki that we knew at this particular time. And this photograph, in part, is the inspiration for my title. Loki was the god of mischievousness, if you will, the god of mischief. He's also been compared to a gremlin, to our own homegrown insurgent. And I'll explain to you why that is. That Juki here, who is having a ball, was diagnosed when he was 11 months old with something called Smith-Lemli-Opitz, which is a syndrome that makes it difficult for children with this syndrome to metabolize cholesterol. And many of the developmental challenges that Juki faced when he was a child, we attributed to this very rare syndrome. It's about 1 in 50,000 children are born with this syndrome. And if you do the math, you know that there are only a couple hundred kids with this syndrome, and here in the United States. So few, in fact, that the yearly conference that we have to find out more about the syndrome and meet other families actually meets only every other year. So here's Juki on this plane. What we began to find out about 3 years into Juki's life was not only that he had this rare metabolic syndrome, but that he was also the only child on record to have what's called regressive autism, in addition to Smith-Lemli-Opitz, in addition to and separate from. And this is why, in this particular flight, or picture 5 years ago, we're coming back from a trip to the NIH. And Juki and I have gone to visit the NIH every 6 months to a year to have him looked at by the people who best understand his syndrome, but for another important reason that I'll speak of in a moment. And that is this: Juki is an N of 1, the scientists tell us. He is the only one who has both this syndrome and regressive autism in the way that he does. And because there's some research now into autism and cholesterol, and the extent to which cholesterol can help us understand autism, as well as this rare syndrome of Smith-Lemli-Opitz, Juki may be a sort of medical Rosetta Stone that, because of the work that we keep having done on him every 6 months at the NIH, we may be discovering things about autism, which strikes somewhere in the neighborhood of 1 out of every 144 children, as well as about Juki and the few hundred friends who we're in touch with via email and Facebook who have this interesting syndrome. But the other way that this manifests itself for us is the great difficulty that we've had in raising Juki. The head of psychiatry at Johns Hopkins once told us that of all the children with SLO that she had worked with, he was the most hyperactive. And we would tell friends this story when we would regale them with what Juki was up to now. I'll give you examples in a few minutes. And then Kate, my wife, brought him back, or brought the family back to this conference on SLO. And the woman from Johns Hopkins said, "No, you misunderstood me. He's the most hyperactive child I've ever met." And you can imagine that without the ability to communicate well, Juki, when he was 2, he maybe had 50 words. When he was 2 and a half, he maybe had 75 or 100. By the time he was 3 and a quarter, 3 and a half, he had spoken his last words, which were all done. And so he was all done with language, and he lost some skills as well. But he had a spark. And the spark first manifested itself in the difficulty with which we've had in raising him. This is taken from one of Kate's blogs. Kate has written about this, saying that Juki has, on occasion, torn items off the walls, ripped the handle and deadbolt off the front door, pulled his curtain rod out of the wall, leaving a large hole, yanked the toilet paper holder out of the wall, leaving a small hole. He has chucked many items down the stairs, including his sister's violin. He has whipped things at ceiling fans, broken multiple lamps, flushed something, probably Kate's keys down the toilet, necessitating the replacement of that toilet, thrown various items at the ceiling, and then the recent classic, feeding 3 boxes of wipes into his fan. This is what the result was from that. And so you can imagine that in addition to the challenges of parenting Juki, the fact that he was so insistent on breaking things, on investigating cause and effect in the way that another performer from Indiana, David Letterman, could do when he would throw watermelons and other items off of the the theater and then watch them explode like fireworks. I don't know if you've seen this, this footage, this effect. Juki loves to do this with glasses when we go to restaurants and at home. We judge our babysitters once upon a time by how few glasses Juki would break in their presence. And so at one particular time, Truman, then 3 years old, said, "Hey, let's find Juki. I wonder what he's up to." So we went into his room, and here he was. He had climbed into a closet, into a box, and he's holding himself in this closet by this foot. And now he's holding on by 2 feet. And now and I'm sorry for the picture quality, this was with my iPhone 3. You can see if we back up that box is actually about 7 feet off the ground. And Juki had climbed up into this closet, climbed all the way up there. Here's Truman as a youngster climbing into the bunk bed. Now Juki's holding on just by his knees. I went to go tell Kate about this, but she was sleeping. So I went back, and I was able to capture this on film. Just as the box was finally deteriorating and falling out of the closet, he caught himself on this IKEA bookshelf and then watched the box fall out, and then caught himself again, jumped down on the dresser, down on the floor. Why? Because he wanted to spend some more time in the box. And then he jumped right back in. So he's had a lot of fun as a destructive little imp. I've had a lot of fun writing about this in my poetry. My second book of poetry comes out this year. This is one called My Entropy Elephant, about how all the t-shirts in our house have become, all the shirts have become t-shirts, all the gowns strapless. If a tree falls in the forest, run to take the axe from his hands. You get the idea. I'm not going to read the whole poem, but he has, with the help of people at Johns Hopkins and other places, calmed down some. And I think a lot of that calming has come from all of the time that I've spent with Juki. And time that you spend with a child who doesn't speak with words and who doesn't have really a clear sense of the past or the future changes him. I'm called by his mom and others the Juki Whisperer, because now I can actually calm him down. A couple months ago, I brought him to see Maxine Hong Kingston give a talk in this very room. And because Kate was out of town with the Bookend kids, I then brought him to a poetry reading. I said, why don't I push this a little bit? And although he laughed at the sad poems, I got an email from the owner of the bookstore who said how well-behaved my child was. And I sent this to Kate, and she posted it incredulously on her Facebook page. Because what I've done with Juki is I've learned from him how to slow down, how I needed to readjust my own biorhythms to his, to take him on adventures. And what we were learning earlier about kelpies, how when they're small, you can pick them up, and then you can exercise them, and they grow bigger and bigger, and you find that you have to exercise yourself. I found that I was doing this with Juki, that I learned how to deal with his hyperactivity. And I learned that when he wanted to bite and scream, if I just picked him up and held him upside down and held him up like this, that I would talk with him. He wouldn't talk back, but he would stop screaming, in part because he didn't quite always care to be upside down when we had these conversations. And I found, as we learned with the Kelpie, that I became stronger because Juki became bigger, but still, it was important for us to continue these conversations. So I've learned a great deal about paying attention to a world that I would not need to analyze. I learned a great deal about stopping to pay attention to far trees, as Juki is doing here, or to blades of grass. And this is really the way that I can do all the things that I do. That time with Juki on the weekend and after school requires a sort of respite that most of us don't have if we are not into yoga or meditation or deeply religious or reading about Zen. All the different ways that through the history of human culture, we've thought, how do I quiet my mind? How do I find a path to tranquility? And my path has been through Juki. Last week, we went to the quad. And in these pictures, you can notice, here he is sitting Buddha-like, that he is noticing the world and paying attention to the quad in the way that I think none of us ever get a chance to do, right? We walk across it, we're late for something, we might see someone playing Frisbee, but never has the quad seemed so peaceful than when we went out some afternoon a little bit before sundown. And I wanted to present these pictures to give you a sense of how much peace I've gained in the most unexpected place, and the lessons that I've learned from this little boy who has never spoken his name. I thought that I would finish by presenting to you a video, but a video from a perspective that might give you the sense of how I've had to change my perspective in order to become a part of his world. At the end of this video, you'll see that he bends over because he's grown so used to the sort of communing that we do when I pick him up and hold him upside down, that this is the way that he asks, that could I again pick him up and hold him upside down so that we could have that moment of Zen together. Let's see that video now. And remember, the perspective has been changed purposefully so that you can get a sense of the strangeness of Juki's world. Here it is. And although we've learned about great intellectual pursuits today at TED, and although we've had so much food for thought, I would also ask you to think about where in the world will you find food for no thought? Where will you have an opportunity to step out of the kind of intellectual hamster wheel that many of us find ourselves on, either because we're overscheduled or because, like me, we've got too much on our plates? And where are we going to find that moment of respite, that moment of Zen, as we hear on Comedy Central, and step outside of these intellectual pursuits just long enough to pay attention to where we are at that moment. Thank you very much for your attention today.